Can you point to some practical cases where DAO governance has catastrophically failed? I'm thinking, there's this Uki DAO case that I'm not super familiar with, but I think you are. And then there's obviously like the Aragon thing that happened like late last year. Wondering if you have like if those are relevant examples in your view, and if you have others in mind.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of a party trick where I challenge the crowd to throw like any hack or disaster or failure in the last 2 years at me, and I will explain how it's been a governance hack in whatever sort. So like Aragon is an obvious one. What's the problem with Aragon? And that's a fundamental structural problem in the whole space. The idea is to protect a value, let's say like a Aragon Treasury or the TVL of a DeFi system or whatever, a value, let's say, of 100 by a token that's worth only 15, market cap 15. That's an obvious attack vector. I mean, Martin, my co-initiator, has written about that in our white paper in 2019. Vitalik has talked about this with respect to Maker in 22 at length. So it's a widely known factor, and it's nowhere else ever in history has that. It would be like trusting the eyes of your bank manager to not run with the money instead of like the system behind it. But everybody still believes like, yeah, we need to solve this alone. Like fragmentation is another big problem of that. So that was the Aragon case. If you look into into their blog post, why they decided to dissolve their foundation and then like leave the decentralized space is they said like we couldn't set up a system including human judgment. I mean, that's what we're doing at Q with including the ICC and all of these things. B, transaction costs. So they couldn't do on-chain voting, which I think is paramount. Snapshot is great, but it's a crux. It's a tool. It's not what it should. Like voting should be on-chain. And then the third thing was exactly that. They were missing an external, credibly neutral security anchor for their treasury and governance. So that's one. UkiDAO, another super interesting one. So the UkiDAO case, what the takeaway for many people is like there was a California judge who decided that all DAOs are going to be everybody's responsible for everyone in the DAO.
So the unlimited liability.
Yeah, the unlimited liability and part of that. And if you look into that, and if you have a little bit of a legal background, what happened is the following. So a California judge, the first question a judge always asks is, do I assume jurisdiction over this case? Do I take this case? So here, in the absence of any kind of contract, rules, whatever, description of what that DAO actually is, that judge decided to say like, well, that's a California resident who's suing, so I have to assume jurisdiction. So what we do like for the QDAO and what we offer to others is like a contract, which we call constitution, you could call it whatever, which is a private contract amongst all members of the DAO. So there you have something where a judge would look into and say like, what am I dealing with here? And that contract would say like, we are the DAO and blah, 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 this is how we do things. And another thing, our constitution includes, and others could include as well, is an integration with the ICC. So that concept is coming from like international trade, or I was in telecoms, international roaming. So you have international parties that can agree on the terms of the trade, like American and Chinese can agree on the terms of the trade, but they can never really agree on the jurisdiction. The Chinese won't go into the US or otherwise to beef out their dispute. So they came up with this idea of private arbitration. And the ICC and some others, like this ICC being the biggest one, they are being recognized by all relevant courts around the world. So that judge in the US would have said, had he seen a contract or like a constitution, including the ICC for a dispute resolution mechanism, guys, I'm not assuming jurisdiction, it's like, go beef it out before the ICC, and then you can come back and I will happily enforce arbitral award of the ICC, because that's what then nation, state, or local courts do. So that's what happened. It's not that that judge was on a mission to determine all DAOs being whatever, And the other thing what happens is, like, if they don't have any, they have to tap into their toolbox. They have to use the tools given to them by the law. And the DAO wasn't anything he knew, but a private contract, including the ICC. That would have been something that guy would have known.
So essentially, in this case, what takes place is that because there is no contract, there is no binding agreement between the DAO members, the judge presiding over a dispute, looks at what he has in front of him and says, okay, there's no contract, and then defaults back to a standard partnership, I guess it is in the law, right? And the standard partnership is sort of defined in the law as having like these characteristics, and where every person has unlimited liability. And then the other thing is that anytime there's like a member of the DAO who's a resident of a country or a state or any jurisdiction, that person immediately becomes the judge can then claim jurisdiction over that. So basically what you're saying here is that with Q, well, one, there's a contract, and so we can define the terms of the contract and also the jurisdiction in which disputes would be resolved. So for instance, in this case, private arbitration. And then the jurisdiction also falls on whatever arbitrary body is defined in the contract.
Yes, and the beauty of private arbitration is that you have a lot of options that you can choose from. So you can choose the law applicable to the proceedings, you can choose the law applicable to the subject matter or to the substance of the case. You could even choose for the contract to be the law and nothing else, which we did for Q, because we believed that we had to be neutral as possible. So we are independent of any nation, state, or country, or whatever. And the partnership in the law is kind of like a catch-all clause. It's like a fallback, If it's not this, if it's not that, well, then it's got to be something. So it's a partnership, But had it been like a contract, like a private contract, this happens, and this is so customary in like international trade, as I said, like in telecoms, global roaming agreements. It's the same thing. It's nothing really new, It's like blockchain. It's a good combination of things that are tried and tested.
Yeah, and blockchains being inherently, global systems, it makes sense for blockchains, perhaps to adapt and adopt their contractual or sort of like legal structure to something that's been tried and tested in international business and sort of international commerce for decades.